is Dr. Clayton. I am your humble host, and today I'd like to talk about something that is extraordinarily common, a very common daily issue that everyone has from time to time. Some people have pervasively, and that is anxiety that prevents them from doing certain things, or at least doing them confidently or in the best way. So I'd like to start with how the brain works. And your brain essentially does three things. It thinks, feels, and acts. And it does them in that order. So for example, you don't feel things randomly. You're not randomly happy or sad or motivated. You first have to think a certain way. You have to think about something in a certain way in order to be motivated about it or excited about it. And you don't do things randomly or accidentally until you feel a certain way. You don't act a certain way until you're motivated or happy or depressed or whatever. So your brain works very reliably in that order. It thinks, feels, and acts. So what that means is that we don't have much direct control, or one might even argue any direct control, over how you act or how you feel. And somebody would say, oh, well, I control what I do. I can pick up this cup and do whatever I want with it on purpose. But ask anyone who is trying to lose weight, anyone who's trying to quit smoking, anyone at all who has, some kind of compulsive behavior, which is almost everyone, if they are in control of their behaviors, and they will know that that is not the case. Obviously, we have some limited control over what we do immediately right now, but generally, our unconscious mind controls well over 95 or 98 or 99% of what we do. And it's those programs that will tend to determine our happiness. It's what we do 99% of the time that makes us happy or not happy, not the individual things that we choose to do in the moment. Likewise, you don't, somebody might argue that you can feel the way you want, but anyone who is not happy or not motivated or wants to do something that they don't want to do, those people are going to confirm that you don't have control over how you feel. Now, the good news is there's one really, really good bit of news, and that is that the one thing you do have control over controls the other two things. You can think whatever you want at any time. There's nothing that influences in your brain how you think. Thinking is the first thing that happens. And depending on how you think, if you know how to do it, depending on how you think, that can influence or even determine how you feel, which in turn can determine how you behave and what you do. So, fortunately, the one thing that we have complete control over gives us indirect control over the other two things. So, that's sort of some background. To focus it back down for today, I want to talk about confidence and anxiety. And they both refer to wanting to or not wanting to do actions, and and how you feel about doing them. So, for example, and there's one really critical thing that I want to talk about, and it's related to how you think. If you think about something in a certain way, it will generate anxiety. If you think about that exact same thing in a different way, it will generate confidence. And there might be, like, some people are afraid of dogs. Other people are completely comfortable with dogs. And those people might even meet the exact same dog or hear the same input or see the same input about dogs and react completely differently because they interpret that information differently in their mind. Their brain could be exactly the same. There's nothing wrong with the person's brain who's afraid of dogs. It's just that the way they think about dogs leads to negative feelings. And they don't have to be that way. There's nothing wrong with their brain. If they were to think a different way about dogs or whatever, and it's 98% of the audience now is saying, well, yeah, of course, it's you can think about dogs differently, and that would. But then the 2% of people that are afraid of dogs are like, oh no, there's no way I could ever do that. That couldn't possibly happen. But then I say, oh well, some people are afraid of elevators. Most people aren't. And then the 95% of people that are not afraid of elevators are like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. And then the 5% are like, well no, I couldn't do that. And the reason for that is that we tend to assume that our habits of thinking are more true than other ways of thinking. So, for example, if I've practiced unconsciously thinking about dogs in a anxiety-producing way, it's going to feel like that is the more true way to think. But your thoughts are not true or false. They're not right or wrong. They're not good or bad. They are just what you have. The way it really works is your unconscious mind's job is to automate thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that you are not currently controlling. You can take control of any of those things at any time. But if you don't, your brain's job is to do whatever you've done in the past. That is essentially the setup of your brain. That is how your brain works. And so what that means is, if I'm used to thinking about dogs in an anxiety-producing way, then it's going to feel more true because my unconscious mind is just giving it to me automatically. But it's not really more true. It's not really right or wrong or good or bad. It's just what I'm used to. We just tend to have an irrational connection between what we are used to and what feels like is true. And that's the first thing that should be broken. There's no connection between us feeling like something is right, us feeling like something is right and us automatically receiving that thought, feeling, or behavior. So the first thing is to open your mind and realize that you can think whatever way is most useful for you. It's okay to do that. And it sounds strange when you say it out loud, but we tend to assume it's not okay. We tend to assume that, oh, well, I think about dogs in this anxiety-producing way. That's the real way to think about dogs. You know, one funny thing is, if you ask someone who has a fear about something, if you ask them to think a different way about it, they'll think about a very similar way that's slightly different. Like, for example, if you ask someone who's afraid of dogs, well, have you thought about thinking about dogs differently? Or how could you think about dogs differently? And they'll still imagine like the aggressive dog or a dog being aggressive. And they're like, oh, well, maybe if I turn and run faster, I can run faster than the dog. And of course, that doesn't change anything because they're very slightly changing their thinking. Whereas someone like me and probably you, if we think about a dog, we think about petting the dog or feeding the dog or playing with the dog or just looking at the dog or whatever in a very non-threatening styles of thinking about dogs. So the bottom line is that our automatic thoughts, feeling, behaviors are not more true than ones that new ones that we get or ones that other people use. So we have to let go of that idea and be willing to accept a more useful way of thinking specifically, but also feeling and behaving. Another way of thinking about this is, your brain produces this like conveyor belt of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And what comes off of the conveyor belt is not true. It's just what you programmed into it before. Your brain will do whatever you are most used to doing, thinking and feeling. And it will just produce that. But that doesn't mean it's true. That just means that that's what's coming off the conveyor belt at this time. Okay, let's see. So let me go back to the thing that I actually want to talk about today, which is, in what way do people who have anxiety about something think differently about that same thing than someone who does not have anxiety, someone who's comfortable with that same stimulus? And this is probably what I work with the most. I work with other things also pretty frequently, but the thing that I work with the most probably is this idea of, anxiety and confidence and being able to do things, not being afraid of certain things. There's a lot of people who can't fly or drive or go in an elevator or be around dogs. They're basically limiting their lives and not being able to see their families, etc., because they are thinking about whatever the stimulus is in a way that produces anxiety. And if you keep doing that, and you could add multipliers to the anxiety to the point where it becomes a panic attack. It overwhelms you. So here's the main principle that I want to talk about today. Someone who... Okay, so here, I want you to sort of realize this yourself. Think about anything that you already feel comfortable doing. Watering a plant, making a sandwich, doing your job, going to school, if you feel comfortable with that. Whatever you feel completely comfortable with, no problem. Think about that for a second. Just take a second to think about that. Now, the way you probably thought about that was you imagined a quick picture or video of that activity and yourself completing it successfully. For example, if I think about making a sandwich, I think about putting it together and then having the sandwich at the end. If I think about watering a plant, I imagine watering a plant and a plant being watered at the end. This sounds pretty simple, but you're going to see an important difference when we get to what else you could do. So now, if you are afraid of something, think of something that creates anxiety for you. Most people have at least one thing, sometimes more, that creates anxiety. And just to, if you want to do this little experiment, take the time to do this. Just think of something that creates anxiety. Now, the key difference, there are a lot of differences, but the key difference between what you thought of before and what you're thinking of now is that with the thing that creates anxiety, you do not complete the thought to a successful conclusion. For example, at some point, probably in the first half of the activity, you stop and either think, oh, I can't do that, or it reaches like a climax and you stop. Maybe you repeat it and try to go back to it and you hit a wall, like you can't get through that. It's not a real wall, but it just kind of feels like a wall because you're used to not imagining going through it. Maybe you have some anxiety about going through it, etc. So that's the key difference, and that's what I want to talk about today. And just kind of filter through your memories. I'm willing to bet that everyone will find that this is true. When you think of something that you feel comfortable doing, whatever it is, when you think about it, just if I say think about that for 3 seconds, you probably think about maybe beginning it or something in the middle and then finishing it successfully. Whereas if you think of something that creates anxiety, you imagine, what you do is you imagine stopping somewhere in the middle. Like the thought process, the train of thought, stops somewhere before the thought reaches its successful conclusion. I think as you filter through your memories and test this out, you will find that to be the case. There are some other differences that are important, but this is the most important difference. Now, I've been doing this for over 18 years now, and the biggest obstacle that I have, or the biggest challenge that I have, is getting people to accept the idea that if you think about something in a different way, like it's, first of all, that it's okay to think about something in a different way. I always hesitate here because I want to jump in and say, okay, now think about your thing that creates anxiety in this way. But most people's brain react against that. They're like, no, I haven't done that in a long time, or never. I've never done that before. That's not possible. It's not true. It's not right. I'm ethically required to think about it my old anxiety-producing way. Whatever excuse your brain can scramble up. And when I say your brain, I mean your unconscious. So if you're having any of that, or if you start to have any of that, just relax that, let that go, and just be like, okay, I'm going to try out a new way of thinking. It's okay to, if you're so used to stopping in the middle, like let's say I'm afraid of dogs, and somebody says, imagine petting a dog. Probably what I will do as someone who's afraid of dogs is I will imagine looking at the dog being not approachable at all, and me not petting the dog. That is probably going to be what I think. If I'm afraid of going over bridges in a car, and somebody says, imagine going over a bridge in a car, I'll probably imagine being in my car, looking at the bridge, and mentally I can't go through with it. Like I stop right there. And maybe I repeat. That is usually the pattern that happens. Now I'm going to tell you to go imagine going over the bridge. It's safe because it's just in your mind. You can do it. It's okay. There's no It's not right or wrong, it's not good or bad, it's not true or false. You're just going through this in your head, and you're going to do it in a smooth, relaxing way. Okay? So think of the thing that you have anxiety about. Notice that point at which you used to stop. Just relax, and what you're going to do is, smoothly, you're going to go from beginning to the middle to the successful end, and you're safe. Now, to the extent that you did that just now, I'm not going to say that you could do that, because you have 100% ability to do that. It's just a matter of whether you actually did it or not. To the extent that you did that, you felt closer and closer to 0% anxiety. If you just do that, if you think about your anxiety producing thing in the exact same way that you think about something you're completely comfortable with doing, you will also be completely comfortable with the former activity, the one that used to produce anxiety. So I want you to, let's just everyone take a second to think about your anxiety producing thing, and think about the beginning, think about the middle, and think about the successful end. So for example, if you're afraid of dogs, you imagine, make yourself go through this, seeing the dog, petting the dog, everything's fine, and then being done petting the dog. Maybe the dog licks your hand. If you're afraid of going over bridges, take a moment to just relax, be in your car, start going over the bridge, be at the metal part, and then exit the bridge, and you're fine. If you're afraid of elevators, imagine going to the elevator, pressing the button, going up or down, and exiting to the floor successfully. If you're afraid of public speaking, take a moment to see yourself getting ready, see yourself talking, see yourself finishing, and everyone being happy for you. Now here's the thing, there's basically 3 parts to every change. There's understanding how you are creating the problem in the first place. And it's good that you're creating the problem. If someone else were creating it, or if it were part of the outside world, there'd be nothing you could do about it. The one person that you have control over is creating the problem, and that's the best news. So number 1, understand how you're creating the problem. Number 2, make a decision that you are going to do it the new way from now on. And number 3, practice and repeat. Now, in case anyone's wondering about hypnosis, hypnosis is essentially amplified mental practice, and it greatly amplifies that 3rd step of the process. Doing something in hypnosis once is like doing it 1,000 times outside of hypnosis. It's more complex than that, but that is a simple way to explain it. But in reality, you just have to do those 3 things. You have to understand how you are creating the problem. That, by the way, is actually my primary job as a hypnotherapist. Repeating something or putting yourself in hypnosis and giving yourself suggestions is actually not the most important part. The most important part is understanding how you are creating the problem, understanding how you're creating the problem, and understanding a better way to do it in your mind so that it does not create the problem anymore. So you have the solution. Number 2, simple but important, making the decision that you are going to do it the new way from now on. And number 3, repetition, making it so that the most common or frequent way that you think about the thing that you had a problem with becomes the solution-oriented way, becomes the new way. As soon as that becomes the way you're most familiar with, your brain will start doing that automatically. So those are essentially the 3 steps. And dog's acting up a little bit. You'll probably meet my 2 therapy Maltese at some point. Okay, so that is the main thing I wanted to talk about today. So You have control over how you think, feel, and behave. You have direct control over your thinking. You have indirect control over the other two. If you have a feeling or a behavior that is limiting you, you have the ability to change it. Right now, I suggest that you just focus on identifying how your thinking is creating the problem. And specifically today, we talked about one of the elements of an anxiety-producing style of thinking being thinking about something only halfway or not going all the way through with it, and then maybe even repeating and just never getting to the successful end. So understanding that aspect of an anxiety you might have. Understanding how to do it the new way, where you go all the way through to the successful ending. Deciding that you're going to do it that way from now on, and then repeating it. Repetition. Doing it over and over until it becomes the thing that your brain is most familiar with. Your brain will not start doing something automatically until it becomes the thing that you are the most familiar with. Okay, and that's it. So if you have any questions, feel free to email me at info@claytonhypnosisclinic.com. The website is in the upper right of the screen. So feel free to go to the website, and I am more than happy. I feel like my primary job in life is to help people in this, in this one little way that I can. So if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to send me an email, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you very much, and I will look forward to seeing everyone again soon. Thanks.